I'll tell you what this episode's about. There was a science experiment one time where these doctors decided to try to prove that people's dogs were the same as their owners, that they behaved the same as their owners. So they took an architect's dog and a mathematician's dog and a musician's dog, a traveling musician's dog. And they put them all in this room with a whole bunch of Milkbones. And so the first dog, the architect's dog, he took the Milkbones and built a replica of the Golden Gate Bridge out of the Milkbones. And the doctors are furiously writing on the other side of the two-way glass that we're watching through. And then the second dog, the mathematician's dog, well, he spelled out pi, as far as he could go, 3.14, blah, 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 in Milkbones on the floor, right? And the doctors were, there you go. They're writing all that down. And the musician's dog, he came in 20 minutes late, screwed the other two dogs, ate all the Milkbones, and left. It's actually hard for me to count the number of times that I had to fight in this business to get paid. Sometimes it was literal. I remember being at a gig in Mississippi with a couple of guys we played a honky-tonk, what it was, and cinder block building out on the edge of a secondary road in the woods, it was a speakeasy, really. And I remember at the end of the night trying to get the $300 we were promised to play this place, and the owner, of course, didn't want to pay us, and he made up a bunch of bullshit as to why he shouldn't. And so I took him out back, and nothing happened. We went out back, and he looked at me and said, "Have you got a gun or a knife?" And I said, "No, do you?" He said, "No." He goes, "Well, this ain't going to be too interesting, is it?" And I said, "Can you just pay us? We don't need to even do, what are we doing out here?" And he's like, "Okay, whatever, fine. I'm not hiring you again," right? And we did nothing wrong. We played well. People danced all night. It wasn't that. There's a mentality, and it will never be gone. It's still here today. There's a mentality that musicians should play for nothing. That if I had $1 for every time somebody said to me, "If you play this thing or this place or whatever, it's great exposure." Exposure is a fucking medical condition. It's not a commerce, right? It's not, it's so frustrating because people just don't get it. They don't get it. The other rather horrendous part of that equation is that people in the industry, people who control the industry, right, or their little corners of the industry, they all feel the same way. They look at an artist and go, "Well, we're going to do this and this for him," and the things that they're doing don't generate any income for the artist. Or if it does, it generates so little that it's pointless to even get yourself involved. And it's like the recording industry has been completely stacked against the artist since day one. It's a fact. There is no such thing as a sweetheart deal with a record label. And now, mind you, there's been some exceptions, like Rufus Wainwright III has a deal with Geffen, I think, where they paid him, $2 or $3 million and said, you just make whatever record you want for the rest of your life. You just make the records, whatever you want. We'll put them out, blah, blah, blah. Like, it has happened where the label, the head of the label sees somebody and just goes, this guy is a genius. And I don't care if he doesn't make it commercially. He's going to make music that is going to live forever. And I want to be the angel investor in that. And that's fine. It has happened. It does happen. But mostly, 98% of it is a label signing an artist and then instantaneously taking all their power away and all of their earning ability away, and claiming that something that they're doing, as publicity or whatever the case may be, is some great boon to this artist. And when the artist fails because the label doesn't do what it said it was going to do and can't deliver what it's promised in the contract, it suddenly becomes the artist's fault. It's the artist that fucked up and didn't do a good enough job, or didn't do this or didn't do that. And the guy who's playing the music and writing the music and paying for everything suddenly becomes the problem. That's how this business works, and it's worked like that for at least 80 years so far. There's lots of people in the industry, well, not lots, but there's many people in the industry that you could cite, such as Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley had a sweetheart deal with RCA, but RCA made millions and millions of dollars off that man. They bought his contract for $12,000. You imagine that. They bought Elvis Presley from Sam Phillips in 1956 or 7, whatever it was, for $12,000, and then went on to make, even to this day, hundreds of millions of dollars. And is that good? Was that good for Elvis? Obviously it was. He was a rich man. But think about it. They were not paying him any great amount of money per record. And his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, even though Parker launched him, put him everywhere he needed to be before he was inducted into the Army, he created Elvis in the public's mind's eye, which was an incredible feat. But by the time he came back and finished making movies by 69 or 68, Colonel Tom Parker was no longer helping Elvis. He was taking 50% of his income. That was their arrangement. 50% was going to Tom Parker. And what was Tom Parker spending it on? His gambling debt. That's where it all went. Tom Parker died in Las Vegas at working as a greeter at one of the casinos. You think about that for a second. And Elvis Presley died taking a shit in his bathroom, riddled with drugs, because he couldn't handle what his life had become. I mean, it's one of the saddest stories in music. And you can look across the board at many, many artists, even the Beatles, when they first hit, worldwide smash, they made no money. The government of England was taking all of their money in taxes, and Apple or not Apple, but George Martin and whatever label they ended up being on, EMI, was taking the lion's share of the record sales. I remember in an interview, somebody asked George Harrison when they were just kids, and he's like, "What are you going to do with all this money and fame?" And they all said the same thing: "What money?" They didn't have any money. They had enough money to survive day to day. That's what Brian Epstein did for them. Brian Epstein was a tremendously good manager and an honest man, but he made money too. He took a lot of money from them, but he also did a tremendously good job. And when he died, the Beatles faltered and eventually broke up. It didn't take long before they were done, and because Epstein was holding them together. Now that's a two-sided story, right? It's a double-edged blade. They ran into the traps and bullshit in the industry, but Brian, by all accounts, was a true gentleman. Rare, so rare in this business. And I could go on and on about this, and I will, because this is the place where I've tried to make a living for 39 years. I've had to fight all this for 39 years, and it's never ended, and it never will. As long as I'm still doing this for a living, there's always going to be somebody who feels that they can make money off of me, and while putting in as little effort as possible. And the industry's filled with these people. I've been my knight in shining armor has been my agent, who has been by my side and had my back for 10 years now, Ryan Hership. And if it wasn't for him, I don't even think I would be doing this right now. I would have just faded into the woodwork and said, to hell with this. It's too hard to make this fight, But because I've had Ryan as a booking agent and an advisor and even a manager by times, he gives me great advice, and he's always there for me. So the people do exist. They exist in this business, and there's people, and you're going to find something out. If you're a professional, if you're a musician, or you're trying to become one, a professional musician, you're going to find out that these people do exist, and it's always the same kind of person. When you find that angel person, that angel industry person, it's an individual that not only acknowledges how shithole the industry is, but they actively put it down. And they have no qualms about saying, well, we're not doing that because it's a ripoff, and that guy's a crook, and this guy, and these people are whatever. They're not going to have any qualms about agreeing with what an artist would say about the situation. It's the artist that takes the hit in every way. It's really quite astounding, right? There's no other business where you're asked to create something to sell that doesn't actually exist. You're selling something that doesn't exist. You're selling the sound of your voice and your instruments. You're selling a universally accepted language in a package that is really, the packaging is you. That's the packaging. And if you're not palatable to people, you won't be able to sell the other part of what your creation. And sometimes it's so weird, the business is so weird, that if you're super not palatable, it makes you even more famous, because people like to watch a train wreck. Some people are complete maniacs in this business, and they get ahead because they're a spectacle. Literally, they become, everything that they do becomes a shit show. And so the public just eats it up. They watch it to see what this arsehole's going to do next. And if they're fans, they stand up for them. They take their part. They forgive them. They make allowances for them, and all these different things. Listen. I could go into the psychology of this business for days. It's because I've seen all of it. I've seen what people do. The situation that I was in when Max decided to let Borealis Records troll us, because that's what they were doing. I now have to jump aside a little bit. The reason that Borealis and other labels were sniffing around the East Coast was because of two, well, not just two. There was also, I also have to mention these people, of course, because it's obvious that they completely altered the path of the East Coast music scene. Rita Mcneil in the 80s had achieved a stardom that was unheard of for a Cape Breton artist. And she was a rock star all over the world. She sold millions of records in Australia and Europe, even the States and across Canada. She was my friend, and she was one of the greatest songwriters and singers that has ever been. And of course, she was put in the position she was in by a man named Brooks Diamond, who took her on as her manager, and in some circles, Brooks is considered, a Colonel Tom Parker, not really, well trusted perhaps or whatever. I've worked with Brooks my whole career, and I think I even talked about Brooks earlier in this series. He was one of the first people that ever was dead straight honest with me about my art, and it affected me, and it changed the trajectory of where I was going. And I never forgot his harsh, stern admonition to me, right? And I love Brooks, and I love his wife Fiona. They're incredible people, and they've accomplished things in this business that nobody else has really done. And the other people that were out at this time were the Rankin family. Now the same thing. They came up out of nothing and became superstars. They deserved every ounce of it. These people were. Jimmy Rankin is one of the best songwriters on the planet, and the girls singing and John Morris's piano playing, and my God, they were undeniable. It was just one of those things. There's a lot of that goes on in the industry, and I've said it before, but people are undeniable. You can't stop them from being famous because they're so fucking good that you can't stop it. It's like a juggernaut. Along about this time, there were two other individuals who completely altered what the rest of the world thought about Cape Breton and the East Coast. One was a young girl fiddler from Troy, Cape Breton, named Natalie McMaster. She also was a juggernaut. She leapt onto the scene with an album called No Boundaries that just altered everything. It just altered everything. And there were a couple of songs off that record that actually were on the radio. Fiddle and Bow, I believe, were on that record, and there was just, like, she became a sensation. As a fiddler, she didn't sing, she didn't do any of those things. She put together a completely new version of Cape Breton music, of Cape Breton fiddle. I often tell people, don't try to play like Natalie, because she has her own brand of things, because even though her uncle was Buddy McMaster, but even with that, she learned to do what she learned from the masters, but then she didn't stay on that path. There's no other fiddler on the planet like Natalie. She plays a certain way, and that's it. It's her own world, and young players that try to emulate her often miss the old gods, right? Because she is that good that she created this new way of doing things, and young players follow her, and you can hear the lack of these young players' knowledge of history, right? Natalie has the knowledge of history, but she chose not to follow that path. She did create something incredible, a whole new way of fiddling, in my opinion, and performing. Her live shows were just unbelievable. Standing up, dancing, and playing the fiddle at the same time, like just unbelievable. I heard a guy in a trade. I'd read a thing in a trade magazine one time that said the last 7 minutes of her show was possibly the greatest live spectacle in the history of music. That's how good she was. And it didn't take long before, she's still successful to this day. And the other fella that came out about this time was a gentleman named Ashley Mcisak. Now, Ashley went a whole different route. He took fiddle music into pop commercial realm. Not just pop, but metal and rock and everything under the sun. He created another form of music with cape Breton and fiddle. And he had a number one song, Sleepy Maggie, with Mary Jane Lamond singing the vocals on it. Gordy Sampson produced this cut. And it was an afterthought almost. I don't think he really, when they cut that song, I don't think this is before he had the record deal, but anyhow, the song went to number one on the pop charts. Like, it was absolutely unheard of. So there was all this activity centered around the East Coast because of all these things going on. And as I said earlier, we considered pitching to the major labels, right? But as I said, I had no history. I didn't have enough history in Canada to gain these people's attention. Even though I knew guys like Dean Cameron at EMI, I knew him very well through Tom, and I talked to Dean on the phone a lot. And EMI was very nice to me, and so was Warner Music. I knew people there, but they all were people in the record label people in this industry have always shied away from me, and I think it's for the same reason that a lot of people do, is because they take one look at me and they realize that I'm just not going to be controlled. Period. It isn't going to happen. And as I've said earlier, it was a detriment to me in some ways, but in the long run, 30 years later now, I'm glad that it happened this way, because I'm glad I stood my ground, because I wouldn't be in the control of the situation I'm in now, like if I had have gone the other way. If I'd have become part of that huge machinery, I would have ended up being, a one-hit wonder, and that would have been the metric, that would have been the legacy I leave behind in my own career, that I had a couple of songs on the radio, and then I drifted off into, obscurity. I prefer to have just a mediocre level of obscurity through my whole career. That's the health. You laugh, but it's the healthiest place to be. This whole thing has nothing to do with having hit songs and charted songs and all this stuff. I mean, it makes it easier, but the main thing you're going for in this business is longevity. To be able to continue writing and performing and recording until you die, that's the key. It isn't having the big flare-up in the middle somewhere in your late 20s, early 30s that lasts 5 years, and then you're gone. And the idea that you're gone subconsciously affects your audience to the point where you actually start to lose credibility in people's eyes because you were there and you fell off, right? So I never wanted to make that fall. I've seen it happen so many times that I was just like, nah, I'm not doing that. It's a huge failure, right? Like it really is. It's like, yeah, he was number one for 3 years, and then what the hell happened to him? He's working at a car wash, right? I didn't want to go that way. So when Max suggested we go with Borealis, all of these things were actually in play. All of this psychology, and everyone has to understand something. Because I know Borealis is the guys that are left in that company. I suppose all four of them, I would say, are likely kind of worried about what I'm going to say in these programs. But I got no animosity towards them. None. I actually love Grit, Laskin, and Paul Mills, and I always loved Bill Garrett. Bill Garrett always seemed to be a straight shooting guy. And I love Ken. I love Kim. I don't know. I never was able to get to know Ken Whiteley as I would have, and he always seemed to sort of disapprove of me somehow. And I've said that before. He struck me as I could be wrong, but he struck me as a very religious guy, and I don't go over well with people like that. So it's if he didn't really care for me that much, that's fine, and I understand why he wouldn't. But what has to be said here is that I didn't come into this deal wet behind the ears. I've never gone into any deal wet behind the ears. I've gone into deals incredibly optimistic because I've always been a huge dreamer. I get an opportunity, and all I see is the potential of it, and I dream. I'm a dreamer. I'm like, yeah, this could do this, this, and this, and this, and I'm kind of a firm believer that if you put enough thought and words out into the universe about something that you want to happen, it probably will, because the things you need to get where you want to go and do what you want to do gravitate to someone who is willing, ready to accept it. And it's your attitude and where you see yourself in your head being in the future that makes those things happen. And that's kind of new age, new world bullshit, but it's not. You can't do something if you don't believe you can do it. You know what I mean? You got to believe. You got to believe, and you got to look ahead and shoot for the stars. You don't shoot for the ground to stay on the ground. Screw the ground. Don't keep your feet on the ground. Dream about what you want to do and see yourself in that place, right? And so I wasn't coming into this. I had already spent, by this time, I was probably 27 or 28 years old, I guess, when this all started to go down. So that meant I was already 10, 11 years into this business, and 10 years in the States, and probably 5 of that in Nashville, right in Nashville, seeing exactly how the inner machinations of the business worked. And fighting my way through shit. Like the story I told at the beginning, I had already been in the position for my entire career at that point of trying to get paid. God damn it, pay me. I'm doing this thing, I'm whatever, now pay me. And it was a fight. It was a fight a lot of times, just trying to get, first of all, agreeing on what was going to be paid, and then actually extracting it from who owed it to me. And it's the same across the board. I'm not the only musician. This has happened to every musician in the history of music. So I wasn't some newbie who didn't know what the hell was going on. I went in with a publishing company set up. I went in with a good agency and management behind me. Rave Entertainment was behind me 100%. And I knew how those tools were supposed to work. And so I went into this eyes wide open and a little bit wide-eyed because I knew I was dealing with Paul, who was, Stan Rogers' producer. And these guys seemed to have a really good resume between the four of them. They'd worked on a lot of really cool stuff, mostly CBC things. And so I didn't walk in not knowing, the people I was dealing with, their history, and my own history. All of that was very clear-cut. So, anyhow, I don't even remember really, I don't really remember how, who was present. I'm sure there was a meeting of some kind. I can't remember. I just don't remember it. But the contract was signed, and I've never done anything more than casually scan any contract I've ever signed because I know all the language of contracts, and I could just look at each paragraph and go, okay, that's that thing, this is that thing, all standard shit. And contracts are bullshit anyway because you sign them all the time and everybody just does what they want. The only time the contract comes into play is when it's time to fuck the artist. That's what the contract's for. It has nothing to do... There's nothing in a contract for an artist where the artist is given any kind of out or given any kind of protection or any... And if it is in there and you have a problem and you bring it up, nothing's done about it. Oh well, that's open to interpretation. It's the safeguards that usually occur in any kind of contract in the music business are so ambiguous that they're useless. They don't have they might as well not be in there because if it's a protection for the artist, it's like, yeah, you have protection against this if it's Tuesday at 4:11 p.m. and you're eating a fucking roadkill sandwich in, Bastrop, Louisiana. Like that's the type of ambiguity or impossible circumstances that occur in the safeguards for the artist in a recording contract or any other kind of contract. They don't really exist. They're put in there as fill, and they don't mean anything. Believe me, I know. So the contract was signed and the plans began to cut the album. So the first thing that had to happen, because they were a small label, they weren't offering any advance. There was no money that changed hands, which was a bit of a pain in the butt because, and it didn't matter anyway because an advance is recoupable by the label. So if I had gotten, whatever, $100,000 up front or whatever the hell, like Ashley had gotten a multi-million-dollar advance for his contract with the major label, but it's recoupable, which means if they don't sell enough records to cover the advance, you owe them the money. It comes out of your pocket. So I figure, what the hell? Doesn't matter. And I felt like I was in better shape because I was going to own the masters. What was happening apparently was they were leasing these records from me, renting them, in other words. And so I thought, well, that's great. I own the masters. They're just renting them for the length of the contract, and when it's over, they revert to me. I don't have to ask for them, whatever. and they didn't want any publishing, so that was good. They weren't taking any mechanical royalties from me, although it was sort of ambiguous about who was to pay, co-writers and stuff, but the co-writers were only making 2.2 cents per unit sold, so it was not a great deal of money, so I didn't worry about that. I was the main writer on the album. So the first thing that happened was I went to Scarborough, Ontario, to Paul Mills' house, where we started to do pre-production for the album that would become Another Morning. And I had never done pre-production before. I didn't actually see the point in it, nor did I really want to do it. It seemed to me a bit of a waste of time. It was like an exercise. It was like practicing recording the record, which for me artistically takes away from the first take magic that occurs in recording studios all the time. And I didn't like getting sewn into arrangements and the possibilities of the songs and all these things. But Paul was very capable, but the first thing he did to me was he raised the keys of almost every song, a lot, like sometimes by 3 frets, a tone and a half higher than I was singing them when I wrote them. And it was a stretch, but for some reason, he liked the high end of my voice. I'm not a big fan of it, but he liked it. He was the producer. I was finding out right away that I was not going to have any control of this situation, which didn't go well with me either. But I was going along with it because he was Paul Mills, and I had to kind of defer to that. He obviously knew what he was doing, but it was very uncomfortable for me. And so that was fine. We went up there and we got all the arrangements together over a few days at his house, in his little home recording studio there. We actually cut things and did multi-tracks, and it was a very interesting experience. And I had loved being around him and Bev, and they were good people, And I got introduced to the 12th fret, the guitar shop in Toronto that I've been going to ever since. They're my close friends there now, and I've bought so many guitars from that shop over the years. My very first decent guitar came from that store. A bit later, after Another Morning came out. So I went back home, and we were realizing, talking to Max, we're like, well, we're going to have to pay. We have to find enough money to make this record. And I was like, okay, well, how much do you think we need? And we went to Lake Wind Sound in Cape Breton, Fred Lavery's studio, where the engineer at the time was a gentleman named Jamie Folds, who, in my opinion, is probably the best engineer I've ever worked with in my life. And he was engineering there. It was a very small studio, almost under construction. They were in the process of, making it bigger than it was and rearranging it. And now it's like one of the premier studios in the world. And so off we go to there and get that all priced out and figure out what all this is going to cost and how many days. And I really don't have a lot of choice in the matter. I have to hire other musicians, which I wasn't used to. I was used to making my records by myself. But I had to hire drummers and bass players and singers and dobro players and piano players and electric guitar players, and holy shit, it was just, and this wasn't cheap. Union scale, for each man in the studio was $300 and $80 an hour after the first 3 hours. So you could imagine there would be times when a guy would be in there and make $600 a day just for one musician. and or four or 500 at least, 380, 460, yeah, $500 or $600. And so we needed money and didn't know where I'm going to get it. So Max said, go to the Royal Bank and see what they'll do. I went to the Royal Bank in Sydney, and with Max's help, I took a loan out of $27,000, a loan that was going to require monthly payments starting right away. So 27 grand in the hole off the beginning. And no help from the label. There was no help from the label. I had just bought and paid for this entire recording. So the recording process itself was highly strenuous. It was, I hate to say this, but I'm actually not a big fan of this record. And it's hard to even describe why. Mostly because there was a lot of weird things going on during the recording of this record. One of the things that happened was that because we had so much money now borrowed and invested in this process, when the time came to go in the studio and cut it, I had laryngitis, and there was no way to rebook it. And I couldn't sing. I could just barely sing, and the whole album is like that. My vocals on that record, to me, are horrible, and couldn't get out of it. I tried to say, listen, boys, I can't sing. You're making me sing not only, 2.5 frets higher than I'm used to singing, but I'm also in a horrible voice. And I was eating these homeopathic tablets to keep my voice working, and they actually worked, but it was fleeting. So the vocals on the record, in my estimation, the way that I know my voice could have sounded then, compared to, I'm a much better singer now, obviously. Everybody gets better as they get older. My vocals just weren't any good. And I just didn't like them. And there was a number of other little things, that bothered me, that I didn't understand why Paul let them stay. Like, there were tuning issues in this record that I tried to get fixed, and he wouldn't fix them. And these are little things, and they mean something to me, but not anybody else. It's just, obviously the record was very successful, and but little things like that, Paul doing an overdub, and I was going out and saying, Paul, your guitar's out of tune. There's a note out of tune. There's this, there's that, and he would tune the guitar, but he wouldn't temper it against the track. He was just, and he I don't know what it was. It was just a weird. We were losing, we lost communication in things like that. My vocals, the tuning issues. We'd even gone to Toronto at one point to put piano on Highland Dream, the song Highland Dream. And of course, the tape was out of tune with the grand piano. So we had to use a computer software program to slow the recording down so that it would be in tune with the piano. And I kept telling them, piano's out of tune. You got to slow it down more. And I fought in the studio for half an hour to get, one more nudge, little lower, and I would get it. I had it almost dead in tune, and they just kind of looked at me and said, it's in tune. It's not, we don't need, and they wouldn't listen to me. So the fucking piano's out of tune on that cut. And that drives me insane. I can't handle that kind of stuff. And it was a difficult process. And there was a ton of money on the line. For me at that point in my life, 27 grand was a ridiculous amount of money. And it was about to get worse because we ran out of money. And I had to go get more money from the bank. Another $6,000. So it was $33,000 now. And for some reason, Paul wanted to mix the album in Ontario. We could have mixed it easily at Lakewind. Jamie Folds would have done a killer job. But instead, Paul wanted to go to, I believe it was Fanshawe College, the music college, the recording institute there. Not Fanshawe, but Ontario Institute of Art. It was the big art institute, recording technology institute in Ontario, in Toronto, and in London, actually, I think it was in. I don't know. Anyhow, that's neither here nor there. Whatever. But we went up there because it was a teaching college, and they had tremendously good equipment, and the engineers were free because they were students. So, and we were going to end up mixing the record ourselves anyway. So Paul and Bill ended up mixing the album. Another big piss off for me, and this one's funny, because I think I've actually mentioned this to Paul somewhere along all these years, but the last note of the solo on Kelly's Mountain, I blew it. It isn't a note at all. It's just I flubbed it. I didn't hit it clean at all. It's horrible. And he wouldn't let me fix it. I asked 3 or 4 times. Like, you have to realize that solo is, I worked my ass off to play that solo. I still play it's so difficult, the solo, that I memorized it, and I play it every single time I play the song, because it's such a good solo. And I did it in pieces because I was blowing it left and right when I was recording it, and there was punch in, punch in, punch in, and God damn it, I blew the last note of the solo, and I was like, Paul, you got to let me fix that. And he wouldn't let me fix it. And so, yeah, I've never let him live that down. I think I've actually told him about that. But when I hear that solo, it's so brilliant until the last note. And it's like, fuck. Why didn't they let me fix that? Like, and as a producer myself now, after having produced, well over 100 records for other people, maybe getting close to 200 now, I understand now how important it is for the artist to be secure with what goes down on the tape or the hard drive or whatever the case may be. They got to live with it the rest of their lives. I should have thrown a goddamn tantrum to fix that note, because it was one note. It could have been easily fixed. Could have punched it in. Could have done it over. It didn't get done, and it's embarrassing for me, because it's so obviously not properly played. It's like, why the hell did they leave that on the record? Like, Jesus, it didn't make it out of the solo at all. He blew the last note. It's just like blonk. It's horrible. So, but I think I've actually picked at Paul about that anyhow. But so we get up to Toronto, or wherever we went to. Maybe I think it was London, to mix the record, and that was an interesting process as well. I'm going to leave it there, because there's a lot to go on after this. But even when that record was being mixed, I wasn't happy with the mix either. I can say that as well. And it was a matter of taste. It was never about Bill and Paul's abilities as producers or mixers or whatever. I came from a different school of tone and sound and presence than they were used to using. They mixed this record very commercially, with the guitars super thin. They took all the meat out of my guitar, and it was a very polished CBC mix almost, and I had a different vision for it. I wanted it to be bigger. I wanted it to be more guitar centric, more, and because my music had always been that way, and but I did what one thing it did do for me was it instilled the love of string sections, which Paul had written and I played on the violin. He wrote great string sections and helped me read them and play them, and it instilled this love for me of this sort of this Phil Spector folk wall of sound thing, which I've still cling to this day. That you can make a lush. There's more to music than I mean. It's nice to hear music dressed down, but it's also nice to hear music fully fleshed out with every possibility being utilized in a recording. And Paul did that really well. He filled things up beautifully, and I learned a ton from him about how to record myself. So he was a massive influence, even though I didn't like the way some of the things actually turned out, only as a matter of taste, not a matter of abilities. I didn't like the way some things turned out, but at the same time, that record, which was my very first successful record, it's funny that it had such a profound effect on me in my future behind a microphone in a studio, because it did. Even though some of it may have even been subliminal, I can still hear parts, even to this day, I can hear parts of Paul in my production. There's some of the things that he did. And as far as I can tell, Another Morning was one of the most involved recordings he had ever done. If you listen to, what he did with Stan Rogers, those were very small recordings. But Paul pulled out all the stops for me in his own way, the way that he did things. And I always appreciated that. And of course, what that record did for my career is beyond reproach. So, I mean, to look back on it now, all these years later, and remember all the angst and things that were going on, that's fine. But the bottom line is, and it will continue to be the bottom line throughout the telling of the rest of this tale, you can't take away what that record did for me as an artist. It made me. There'd be no J.P. Cormier without that album. That's the one that put me on the map, and I don't really believe that anything I've done since has ever had such a profound effect on the industry and on the level of acceptance I had and have in the industry. That record put me on the map. There's no question about that.